Hey guys, it's Anne. We are back. It is Wednesday. I've asked my husband 3 times whether it was actually Wednesday today or not because we move tomorrow and it's exciting. Actually, we start moving tomorrow. We move the next few days. I am here today with a special guest because we're not going to talk about business. And she owns a business and she's had to change things. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're mostly going to talk about mental health and how this whole virus, this whole crisis has affected all of our mental health. Before I do that, I want to give you a tip of the day, and it is a mental health tip. You are not alone. You hear us say that with burgers and bands all the time. You are not alone. It's really important for you to remember that, whether it's in what you're feeling or whether it's the fact that you really feel like nobody else would understand or be able to help you. People are there. So if you need help, please reach out. We can give you some guidance. Laura's here today. She can give you some guidance, tell you where to reach, and we'll get you there. So Burgers and Bands, I do want to mention again, please consider donating burgersandbands.org. We would really love a donation since we're not doing our big event this year. It's going to be very difficult for us to raise enough money to take care of all the grants. We really thought our first event in March would do all of our grants, and we're not going to have that. So if you want to donate, burgersandbands.org, that would be great. And let me introduce you to Laura Reagan. There you go. Hi, Laura. How are you? So, I should also tell you, Laura, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a thing that says comments.
Okay.
You can see what people say, and if you guys have questions, please let us know. Leave a question there, and we can pop it up on the screen. If you have something to say, you have something to add to the conversation, add it there as well. We'd love to hear it. And if you want to start a watch party, please do that. Laura, can you tell us a little bit about what you do? Because you do a lot.
Sure. I'm a clinical social worker, and my practice is in Severna Park. I own a group practice, so there's several therapists who work under me, and our practice is called the Baltimore Annapolis Center for Integrative Healing. And we're a holistic, trauma-informed, somatically oriented psychotherapy group practice. So that's a big mouthful, but
big mouthful.
Yeah. We go by BA Healing. That's our little shorthand name. And I also have a podcast that's called Therapy Chat. And so on the podcast, I interview other therapists and authors and researchers, particularly related to trauma.
Okay. And I've listened to that. You actually have a lot of people listening over there. You're kind of internet famous, or even more than internet famous. You're kind of famous, right?
In some circles.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So when I messaged you and I said, I'd like to have you on my show, and I said, give me some talking points. You said, let's talk about this being a collective trauma. So tell me about that and what that means.
Yeah. So, one of the things about traumatic experiences is that we often feel like we are alone in what we're going through. Trauma kind of makes you feel disconnected from yourself and from other people. It impacts relationships very significantly. And this pandemic that we're going through that's impacting people across the world is what is known as a collective trauma. It's a collective traumatic experience, meaning we're all going through something that is making us feel helpless and overwhelms our capacity to cope. And pretty much that anything that fits into that is what a trauma is. So a collective trauma is something that a whole group of people is going through, like a mass shooting, or like something that we've experienced a great deal of in Severna Park and Anne Arundel County is when someone dies by suicide. That can be a communal trauma, collective community trauma, because it impacts people beyond just the person who's directly impacted.
Yeah, and I've never thought of it that way, and that's absolutely true, especially for those of you who are watching outside of the area. We've had a lot of suicides since we moved to this community. It's actually the first year we were here, we had 5. So it's so I've never thought of that way. The other thing that I have noticed is that we're all going through it, and thank God, we're all going through the same thing. But luckily we have our moments of, oh my God, and pure panic at different times. So, which is good.
Right. It's impacting us all differently
Yeah.
even though we're going through the same thing, and we're not all experiencing it the same way. Again, for people who, in addition to, the fears of contracting the coronavirus or losing, their own health or losing a loved one, or fears about not being able to, you know, work or get food, which are extremely basic needs,
Yeah.
extremely important. There are also people who live in homes that aren't safe, people who are in disenfranchised, marginalized groups, LGBTQ, for example, youth who maybe their support system is at school, but they can't be at school, so they're home where people don't really understand them. Things like that can add to the experience of this trauma, this collective trauma that we're going through. But we all, in an average day, in an average hour, we may be feeling fine, unbothered, or we may be feeling completely overwhelmed and want to just crawl in bed and put the covers over our heads. Or we may feel like we need to run to every store in town to try to get all the toilet paper.
Right. So this is the whole feelings in common, right? We all have some things that somebody said to me the other day. I put this out there on Twitter, and I don't know if you know this, but I'm on Twitter. That's where I am more me. Everywhere else I am me, but on Twitter I am like, I will announce my fears or I will announce my weaknesses a lot faster there than anywhere else. And so I said, I don't think I've ever been this tired in my whole life, including after my Ironman, which I thought was the most tired I've ever been, and after my babies, right after delivering babies. And somebody said, it's grief. And I thought, I don't know that it is, but that sounds right. You think that's right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so it's grief for, and this is something that everyone's going through, is that we've lost what's our normal.
right.
There's a loss of your normal life, and there's also this feeling of like the way things were before will never be the same again. So that's a loss. It's a huge loss. It's like an existential crisis type of loss.
It's, gosh, I love talking to you because these are things I don't think of. But now that you're saying it, I'm thinking there's a lot of times we have grief that we don't think about. And I try to describe that. One thing I know, because I have a son who's transgender. And one thing I know as a mom of a transgender child is, as much as I supported him, as much as I continue to support him and I love him and I will fight tigers for him, I grieved, and I still grieve for the loss of my daughter, but
Mm-hmm.
my son. And I think people who are going through that trauma, that's a whole other show, but people who are going through that grief don't get any understanding because people are like, oh, you have to support them. And it's like, but
Yeah, it's the feeling of you're just supposed to push that aside.
Exactly. So I think, grief, I'm glad you mentioned the grief in this instance and grieving our everyday. What are some of the other feelings that people are going through right now, do you think, that we should be aware of?
Yeah, well, so one of the big ones, and this was especially true when here in our local area, we first started, sheltering at home and not going about our normal days as we used to, anxiety, a lot of anxiety, fear of getting sick, fear of not being able to have enough toilet paper, not being able to have enough food, fear that your loved ones won't be safe. And this whole loss of control, this whole sense of everything's completely out of control and I feel like I'm tumbling through the air. I have no idea where the ground is. So the anxiety is a huge one. But after, that kind of period where we're like, what's going on? I don't understand. When's everything gonna be normal?
Right.
Then it's kind of like this settling into it, and there's been a lot of sadness that people are feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I noticed, and I said to my son, years ago, I mean, really years ago, I think I only had one baby at the time, I lost my voice. And I lost my voice for 7 days, and I mean no voice. And I woke up on the 8th day and I was in tears and I was trying to say to my husband, it's never going to come back. And 15 minutes later, it came back. But we think when we're going through something. So before we thought this is what life is like. And now this is what life is like. So you see a lot of fear about what happens if we open, right?
Mhm.
New fear because that's a whole new change. So I think there's so much to this that people aren't necessarily paying attention to, right?
Yeah, and we as humans, we really like to feel like we can know what to expect, that things are predictable. That
Mhm.
helps us feel safe. And we're a very um, productivity oriented, planning oriented culture.
Right.
Just keep going, push through. And, you know, when there's no end in sight, we don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know what it's all going to mean. We don't know how many people are going to get sick, how many people are going to die, when there will be a vaccine. There are all these things that, you know, everybody wants to know.
Right.
I
Right.
want to know. We all do.
We all do. Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you say that because I think so often we think we're going to go to a therapist, we're going to go see somebody, and they've got answers that we don't. And they're not feeling the same things we're feeling. But in this case, we're all feeling it. You're living it too. And you've got kids at home right now. You've got grown kids, right?
Yeah, they're not at home,
Oh, they're not at home.
which
Okay. So
is hard too.
Or two, yeah, because my Ethan and Zane are both. I mean, Ethan and Blaze are both out of the house. This weekend we will see them. They've all been sheltering in place, and we're getting together because we have to move into the new house, and Ethan's moving home. But yeah, that's hard too, and not being able to see them. So, all
Yeah,
right,
there's another point that I want to bring up. You and I have talked about this a little bit, but there's a lot of grief over all of the graduations that aren't happening, and prom, and spring season of lacrosse, and spring season of softball, and taking SATs, and all of the things that um, we all have been expecting, these milestones. I know
right,
several college seniors who don't get to have their graduation ceremonies, and
right,
all these endings that they thought they were going to have and being able to say goodbye to all their friends, they just had to abruptly come home, and
yeah.
their time in college is done. And it's like, huh?
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's we've got Ethan who had a horrible senior year. It's
Mm.
just a horrible senior year as his last year of high school. And finally he's gonna get a graduation. Everything's wonderful. And now we don't, right? And we've got Zane who in the middle of this, we're moving into another county. So he's leaving his friends. He doesn't even know anybody. And how is he gonna meet them? So he's got grief. I think everybody's got, and we think it's so easy to demean them. It's so easy to say, "Oh, that's not a big deal. It's just a prom."
Yeah, you shouldn't be worried about that when people are dying. And it's like, there's no whose pain is worse. It's what you feel is what you feel, and the grief and loss that you're experiencing, those are your feelings, and you're allowed to have them.
I wish I had actually created that as a banner. There's no whose pain is worse because we can't, it's like a few years ago, somebody said something to me, well, my friend's dying of cancer. You can't complain about that. And I was like, but I can, it's not,
It
at
doesn't
least you look
change.
at
Me being
it.
sad about not having prom doesn't, you know, make you having cancer better or worse. It's just two people in pain.
Right, exactly, exactly. So I want to ask you, how can we cope? What are some of the things? Oops, I do that every time. There you go. How can we cope?
Well, there are a lot of things we can do to cope. One of the really important things is that, we're losing human connection. We're very isolated by being in our homes. So one important way to help you cope is to try to connect with other people in your life. Thank goodness, we have technology to allow us to be connected visually, even if we can't touch, through, Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, and things like that.
Right,
So, stay in contact with your loved ones that you can't be with in person right now.
right.
Um, that's one important thing that, you can do, and it's pretty much accessible for most of us.
Yeah, and I think many people are taking advantage of that. I worry about the people. I talked to somebody yesterday whose mother is going through a deep depression and she doesn't use any technology. And I can imagine how hard that would be, how lonely it would be if you're home by yourself And really, I almost feel like how dangerous that would be. You're home
Oh,
completely by
yeah.
yourself and you're going through this. It's very difficult. Actually, let me ask you that because I did yesterday. This particular person said, "Are any therapists seeing people in person? Is it allowed?" So for somebody like her who's not going to use technology, is that something that is allowed?
Yeah, therapists are in Maryland and most other places on the list of essential um, personnel. So we can see people in person, but for us, we just have to weigh, the risk to ourselves and our clients that we're working with.
Right.
Um, so there are many people, like I mentioned before, people who are in the more marginalized groups who may not have access to, excuse me, computers at home or internet, or if they live on the streets, they can't shelter at home.
Right.
And so there are agencies and organizations that are working with people in person. And there are some therapists who do in-home therapies. So for someone who's severely depressed, that could be an option.
Right.
um,
Good.
People are doing online telehealth. And that's the safest way, but you have to risk if the person needs to be seen in person and virtual isn't going to work, there are ways to do that too, but not every therapist is offering it.
Okay. I want to go back to how can we cope? And one of the things that it occurs to me is if we can start naming what we're feeling, right? And my husband is a great example of this. My husband is he has he almost, it's not that he feels like it's overblown, but he says, I haven't been touched by it, right? I go from my house to
You
my
can't relate to it.
Exactly. So he's an essential worker. He goes from the house to the office, and the office is very spread out. He doesn't see anybody. He goes here, he goes to the office. That's it, right? And then on Saturday, because I got hit by a car, I think I told you that before we started the show. I finally said to him, "Can you just go with me? Because I'm having such anxiety going to the grocery store. Can you come with me to the grocery store?" And we went and we got back in the car and he said, "I never want to do that again." And I said, "Are you okay?" And he says, "That was awful." He says, "That was so scary to see all those people. It was so disorienting to see all those people with masks on. You're walking around and it was scary." And I think that feeling of being able to say that, to name it and say, it's okay for that to be scary. It's okay for me to have been scared there. Right? Do you think?
Right. So
Yeah.
just that moment where he trusted you enough to allow himself to show his vulnerability and say, I didn't like that. That scared me. And you to be able to say, yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I haven't been going up. I'm scared too. Because
Right.
it's disorienting. It's, so maybe that's the first way that it actually hit him in his life directly, how
Right.
things have changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we talk about coping skills. You said, how can you cope? I, you've probably never seen this, and I'm not sure anybody who's ever watched me, and they'll be really surprised, but I literally did a video about 7 years ago that said, I effing hate coping skills.
Hmm.
I was mad. I was angry. I was going through my own depression. I said, I effing hate them. I went on this whole tirade on this video. I don't know where it is. I'm sure I can find it somewhere. But maybe a week later, I was like, I wonder if I can knit. The problem was I had tried running, and every time I'd run, I would cry. I tried swimming, and I can't cry and swim. And like all these things I was doing were things where I was still just ruminating through what I do. And
Mm.
then when I started knitting, and I suck at it, and I realized that I have to think, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, I could get rid of the crap in my head. And I suddenly realized what a coping skill was for. So
Mhm.
what are can you give a better explanation than I just did of what a coping
Yeah.
skill is?
Yeah. So coping skills are really about, and coping skills are kind of like something you can get in therapy, but it's not necessarily um, the only thing that happens in therapy, because you can do deeper work too.
Right.
But coping skills are things that help you when your ability to cope is overwhelmed. So if you're having overwhelming anxiety and you just can't stand it, you feel like you're crawling out of your skin, you need something to help you deal with that anxiety, and that's what coping skills do. So it's a way to deal with what you feel in the moment. It doesn't heal it, like resolve it, process it. It's just a way to make it get better in the moment. And you need coping skills because we have ways of coping already. We all have our ways of coping. So if I feel overwhelmed with anxiety and I come home from work, I may grab, a bottle of wine and have a few glasses of wine to make my anxiety lessen. I think, that's culturally a very common way of trying to cope. But using alcohol to numb your feelings isn't long term, it's not really a healthy strategy. So a better way to cope with my anxiety might be to go running, like you said, and get that energy out of my system, or do something to release it instead of just trying to use something to just make it go away.
Right. One of the things I thought once I found my coping skill that I didn't hate, what I thought was it gave me power. It
Yeah.
gave me power over this thing that felt like I was powerless, right? And that was something nobody had ever said to me. And once I realized it, I was like, I felt like an evangelist. I wanted to go out and tell everybody, if you find the one that works for you, coping skills are awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that we don't want to feel emotions that are unpleasant. We
Right.
don't like feeling pain, obviously.
Right.
So, having a way to cope with your pain and become less afraid of it, because everyone feels pain. It's part of
Right.
life. Suffering is part of being human. But having ways to manage it so it doesn't overwhelm you. I think what we don't like is that we feel like we can't control it. Like, I don't want to feel sad right now,
Right.
or I don't like this anxiety. It's getting in my way of feeling confident.
Right. Right. Yeah. No.
All feelings are okay.
Yeah. No. I think that's I think having feelings is okay. And actually, I want to ask that question too, because there comes a point, and that was when I asked for help. When I went, all the things that aren't working, that should be working, all the things I've always used on a normal basis. Everybody in my family would say, "Mom, you need to run." Right? If I was really cranky at my house, they're like, "Oh, go for a run," right? Because they know I'd go for a run, I'd come back and feel better. Well, when
Mhm.
that wasn't working, I suddenly realized I need support. I need something more. So how do people know they need support? At what point should they start doing that?
Well, I'll mention a few coping
I did it again.
strategies that might help now, and then kind of go into if these aren't enough, that can be a clue that talking to someone could be a help. But so things that you can do to help you cope with the feelings that you're having during this pandemic or any time that you're struggling. I mentioned reaching out to others for human connection. That's a really important one because it's a basic need that we all have. And you mentioned, Anne, just talking with people, like letting your feelings out, saying it out loud, journaling. So sometimes, and right now when we're confined at home and the people we live with may not understand how we feel, they may be more like your husband, not to say he's not supportive, but where he was just like, this isn't affecting me.
Right.
So he couldn't relate to how people were feeling about it, I'm guessing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So if that's the case, the person or people you live with don't understand your feelings and they may not really be able to hold space for you or be able to tolerate you talking about how you feel, you can journal. It's a way that you can get it out and it does help, but you don't have to worry about what they think about it or if they think you should be feeling that way or not. You can just let it out.
Right. That's great.
Yeah, and another way is like journaling is to make art because you can do it privately. You can have, a piece of paper, you can color mandalas, which can help a lot with anxiety. And there's like mandala coloring pages that we can find online. You can print out, color in, or you can just, freehand draw. Just don't even worry about it looking like a certain form, but just putting color on on a piece of paper
Yeah.
can be a way to express how you feel. And you could think about your sadness and give it a color and put that on the paper. Just a very simple way to get it out. And so it's not like you're just holding it in.
Right. Right. I have
Singing.
a friend who does knitting, and she does, and I've never done this, but she has given her feelings colors. And she, on the day she's feeling sad, she does that color, and on the day she's feeling happy, she does another color. So she creates scarves, and they're her feeling scarves, which I think is just really neat.
I think that is so cool. And then it's a way to, like, she can look at the scarf and say, there's my sadness, my fear, my love, my joy, my, excitement, my apprehension, my grief.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful way to do it. So
Yeah. And another creative thing that can really be helpful is singing. You don't have to be a good singer. It doesn't matter how it sounds. It's about, for one thing, when you're singing, you're breathing very deeply, and
right.
it actually calms your nervous system to have that vibration from your vocal cords. It goes into your, just really into the core of you,
Right.
and can calm your nervous system. Or just listening to music and singing along with music. Because kind of like you were saying about knitting and knit one, purl two, you can't obsess about, what time do I need to get to Wegmans to get the toilet paper before someone else gets it, if you're singing along with lyrics in your head, or if you're saying to yourself, knit one, purl two. Your mind can't, in detail, focus on both of those like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So,
And one thing that, and moving your body in some way, whether it's dancing or running or jumping jacks or push-ups or walking outside, and being in nature. If you can even just go outside and breathe the air, getting a change of scenery instead of being in the house, that can make a big difference too.
right.
And something that Beth said in her comment here is, she said, "Take heart, we've learned to let go of what we cannot change."
Right.
That is a really good thing, is to ask yourself. This is a good way to cope especially with anxiety and fears of the unknown, is, well, what can I control here?
Right.
Like, if you're worrying about, when are they going to develop a vaccine, and you feel like you need to leave the TV on all day so you can catch that news as soon as it comes, that's going to make you feel more anxious because you're constantly hearing about it, you're constantly thinking about it, and there's this urgency. So, what can I change? Well, I can't change when there's going to be a vaccine, but I can change turning off that TV and not focusing on the news about this until maybe at a set time, maybe 5 p.m. or maybe first thing in the morning only or something. It's so simple, but things like that can really make a difference.
Yeah. This is probably one of those things that I shouldn't admit to, but I'm going to admit to it anyway, because that's what I do. I completely spill everything. I had a mom who was horrible, and I spent my whole childhood thinking, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do those things that she did, right? And I spent my whole life, and actually, it's how I got to where I did. It's how I went to college. It's how I picked a husband that was a good husband, and I thought about all those things. So actually, I still do that, and this is the part I shouldn't admit. When I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and those places, and I see something, it's easier for me to see it in somebody else. So like this morning, I saw a business owner who was in a total panic, and she's doing a live video, and she's like, if we don't open, I'm going to lose everything. And this is horrible. And Trump's doing this, and this person's doing that. And I thought, oh my God, she's been on Twitter too much. And that's she's gotten all this information from all these different sources that has freaked her out. And it was a good thing for me, because I suddenly went, oh, I'm wondering if I'm on Twitter too much. I'm wondering if I'm paying attention to too many of these things. So I like that you said that. I think it is, if we can start recognizing that's something that's causing us a problem, then maybe that's what we do. We control that.
Yeah, exactly. And, so here again, the example you just gave is a great one, because we can really get caught up in fear, and we don't even realize that we've shifted out of our logical, rational thinking and into this catastrophic type thinking, or what we call catastrophizing.
Right.
So, if you find yourself thinking everything's terrible, nothing's ever going to be okay, or we're not safe, no one's safe, no place is safe, no one will ever be safe, things that are like extremes in thinking, like black and white, either we're safe or unsafe, or we're, I'm going to be okay, or I'm not going to be okay, or people are bad or good. Like people who buy the toilet paper, they're bad, they're the problem, or, we've got to open now. There's no answer for anything ever that's just across the board the same for everyone. So when you find yourself in that black and white thinking, that's a clue that, you might need to take a step back and ask yourself if there could be any other possible explanations to consider as well. That, like for her, I understand the fear of losing everything.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not true that if we don't reopen May 1st, I will lose everything. That's not true.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's it, is you have to, I'm working really hard to try to understand other people, but I'm also, like it or not, I'm kind of watching what they're doing and going, is that something I'm doing? And is it something I need to stop? Ethan used to say it a lot, control the controllables, right?
Control what?
The controllables. So control.
Yep.
So when I trained for my Ironman, that was it. I was like panicking, and I'm two things. I'm like, what if I get my period on the day of Ironman? And that was a big one. I'm like, it sucks. And what if it rains, right? And Ethan said, you can control the first one. Call a doctor. They'll help you control the first one. And the second one, you can't control. So just worry about the first one, right?
Well, and also, like, in the same way, it's like, worry about what you can control about the rain. Well, do I have a lightweight rain jacket? Do I need a hat? Stuff like that. You can't control if it's going to rain or not, but you can control how you respond to if it rains.
Exactly. So
I want to be sure we talk about that important topic that you brought up about how to get support and how to know when you need support.
So how do people get support, and how do they, I want to say this, how do they know whether they need it, and do you have to need it before you get it? Those are the questions I have.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you think of as needing support. So when we're talking about mental health, if you have anxiety that is bothering you and it's getting in your way, you can ask for help. You don't have to be, afraid to leave the house. It doesn't have to be to a level of what seems extreme to ask for help. I think people often say to ourselves, well, it's not that bad. I should be able to cope with this myself.
Right.
But if you can't, you can't.
Right.
And it's okay.
And it's okay. And you know what? And you're worth asking for help. Right? So
your life matters.
I think, yes, your life matters. And I think sometimes, especially moms, I think we look at our kids and we're like, oh, do they need help? Do they need help? And that's what I did. Right. So how do we accept that we need, it's okay for us to ask. So when we know we want it, when we know we're ready, how do we step out? How do we ask for help? Or
there's so many ways. Of course, all insurance companies, most insurance companies cover mental health. So if you have insurance and you want to get therapy, you can find a therapist who accepts your insurance, and you can do that by looking on the back of your insurance card and calling the phone number to find a therapist who accepts your insurance, or going on their website. And you can also go on this website that's pretty well known, that's called psychologytoday.com, and you can search for a therapist near you. And then you can, if you want to use your insurance, you can narrow it down by what insurances they accept. Not every therapist accepts every insurance. Our practice actually doesn't accept insurance at all, but that's because we are very specialized. So rather than focusing on, just serving whoever has the insurance that we accept, we focus specifically in trauma, and that's our main focus. So another way to find a therapist is to look on Psychology Today or just Google, a therapist near me, like, for example, child therapy near me or trauma therapy near me, or, looking for the specific issue that you're dealing with. With children, a lot of times children, it's the behavior that they are showing that makes the parent think that something's wrong. And the
Right.
parent doesn't know how to help them with the behavior. It could be like grades are slipping, or they're refusing to do schoolwork, which is what a lot of parents are dealing with right now with the online school. These kids who are normally very enthusiastic about school are just like, I'm not doing it. And parents are like trying to, make them do it, and they don't know how to. And the kids are just overwhelmed. And, that's one area of their life where they're trying to exert some control and say, I'm not doing that.
Right. Well, it feels like summer to them, I think. I think the kids, I was thinking about this. This is like asking a kid to do homework during the summer vacation.
Right.
They can't fathom
Right.
for the most part. So, yeah. So I do want to go back because you said you specialize in trauma.
Yeah.
So can you explain what trauma, when we're talking about trauma, it doesn't necessarily, somebody said to me the other day, I have a kid who was in a car wreck and they had to pull her out with the jaws of whatever it is, the
Jaws of life.
jaws of life, right? They had to do this. And now she can't sleep and she can't eat and she's having and so that's trauma. But
Yeah.
but there's other types of trauma. So can you give us a little bit more of that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I mentioned earlier, trauma is any experience that overwhelms your ability to cope. So any experience where you feel helpless and you're unable to cope. It's not just what people think. It's not just having been in a car crash, a plane crash, a fire, combat. Those are the common things that people think of when they hear the word trauma. But
Right.
what you mentioned earlier when you said that you didn't have a good mother, that's
Right.
traumatic.
Right. It's
Anything from childhood, where experiences in childhood like bullying, not being understood, growing up in a family where you are LGBTQ and your family doesn't understand, so you never tell anyone, and then you feel something's wrong with you. Being in abusive relationships, being sexually assaulted or sexually abused, which is extremely common, and people don't realize how common it is. So they think, oh, is that trauma? I don't think so. It was so long ago.
right. Well, and I think, what, when you think about it, so I had another friend who when she gave birth, it was okay. But right at the end, something went wrong, and it was just a few minutes of
Mhm.
total fear. And she said that was trauma. And I was like, that's absolutely right. And I would have never thought of it. And I'm sure there are women all over the world who've had the same experience.
Think about, trauma during giving birth it can be inherently traumatic because of the way that it happens in our culture, that it's not like just a natural thing where you like go in the woods and you squat down and the baby comes and the elders are surrounding you. It's this whole medical thing, and you want it to go a certain way, and it's a very out of control feeling to give birth because your body just starts doing stuff and you can't control it, right? So
Exactly.
just that can be traumatic, especially if you already have a trauma history. So if you had a traumatic childhood and then birth happens and everything goes fine and there's no complications at all, but it can still feel very traumatic.
Yes.
There are any complications, which usually are things that just, don't go as expected. That can be very traumatic. And if there's any kind of fetal distress or mother's distress during the birth process, that could be extremely traumatic. And then think about people who, they have a birth plan, they've got it all figured out, and then they have to have an emergency C-section.
Right.
It's traumatic. It's traumatic because it's a surgery. That's traumatic. It's traumatic because you had this whole plan, you thought it was going to be a certain way, and then it's completely without your control or having really any, you give consent, but you don't have a choice to give consent, really. You have to because it's an emergency. That can be traumatic, and that can be traumatic for babies too. It doesn't mean that, we can't recover from it, and not every traumatic experience that we have results in long-term trauma, but it can. So whenever you have something that still comes to mind when you don't want it to, that's a big clue. And you mentioned this earlier when you and I were talking, how after being hit by the car, you were feeling like you didn't want to go to the grocery store. You were afraid.
Right. So that brings us to the subject was, what if you've previously experienced trauma and now you're in the coronavirus crisis, right?
Yeah. So many people who have past histories of trauma, whether they really consciously know it or not, are finding themselves having these strange reactions that they don't expect during this pandemic. And that includes like feeling, for some people, it's kind of funny, and I've talked about this with a lot of trauma survivors. I have to stay home. I can't go anywhere. Okay. And they're like, good, I'm cocooned at home and I like this. It feels great, because the rest of the time I feel like I'm in danger everywhere I go all the time. And so finally I'm safe at home with the people that I live with and I feel comfortable. So for some people who are normally feeling very hyper alert when they're going through life, they feel good. They're like, this is the best. I'm finally safe. But how are they going to feel when they have to go back out into the world again? Are they going to feel comfortable just returning to their normal lives, or is it going to be even more difficult? We don't know. But for other people who maybe, and this is a big one, I think, especially in our culture, and if you think about our local community, I mean, we are a very busy group of people,
We are, yeah.
Always doing activities. Our kids are in 3 and 4 activities and sports and all these academic clubs. And, the kids leave the house at 6:45 a.m. and come home at 8 p.m., finally done with all the things that they do for the day. And now all those busy things are taken away. And that busy lifestyle can be very distracting from feeling.
Right.
So now, and I saw this woman named Glennon Doyle Melton. I don't know if you know about her.
Yeah.
She goes by Glennon Doyle now. Yeah. So she had this really great analogy that I loved. This busy life we have is like when you shake up a snow globe and the snow is there and you can't really see the little figures that are inside the snow globe until the snow settles down.
Right.
Now in this pandemic, we're settled. We're still, and those little figures that are inside the snow globe are still there. It's our unresolved pain, our relationship issues that we haven't really wanted to deal with, so we just stay busy all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And it could be our past traumas that we've never been able to resolve in the past because we thought they would go away by themselves over time, like having a rough childhood. That in itself is, of course, comprised of many experiences, but it's like, try as you might, that just doesn't go away with time. And that's the thing about trauma, is that it just doesn't go away by itself.
It's funny. I'm gonna make a confession. So I do your social media.
Yep.
A lot when I'm doing somebody's social media. I'm learning about their business. I'm learning about their beliefs. I'm learning about a lot of things. And I called you and said, I think I need a trauma therapist, because I never looked at my whole life. And I did. I called you and said, how do I get help? Because I do realize that I do know it's a problem, because there are whole areas in my life I avoid, whole things that I'm like, I can't think about, or reactions I have to things. And I'm like, I know that I honest to God cannot, we have never had a fly swatter in our house as a grown up. I've never, ever had one, because I can't even stand to walk by one because of my childhood. So that's huge. That's a huge thing that I've always had. I'm like, well, I can just avoid fly swatters. That's okay. But it was funny.
Right. So it's like, So your coping strategy is just to avoid fly swatters. But what happens when you see one? Of course, whatever the feelings are that are making you avoid the fly swatter also are probably getting triggered in other situations too. And that's how, there's no perfect strategy in it. I think what can happen is that our world can start to become smaller and smaller as we do all these things to try to control the trauma triggers. When, because we're afraid that trauma therapy will be so painful that we won't be able to take it, because what these feelings that are inside feel like if we allow ourselves to feel them, we won't get through it. We won't be okay.
Right. Yeah, no. And that is exactly, I think, why I have always avoided it. And so I know there are different therapies, different things that can happen now that maybe are a little less painful.
It doesn't have to be so painful, because what people think about trauma therapy is that it means that I'm going to have to relive all that stuff that happened. And first of all, for people who are walking around with unresolved trauma, you are reliving it all the time. That's why you couldn't go near a fly swatter. It's there, and it's either in your subconscious or it's in your conscious awareness, but it's always there, kind of running in the background, or it comes to the forefront. And with trauma therapy, it can be that it's no longer in the forefront or the background. It's just things that happen, but they don't have that overwhelming emotional charge anymore after you do trauma therapy. And the difference so for someone who had a painful childhood, what's different is, first of all, the goal is not to go back and relive or retell. And people are like, I don't want to tell somebody about all the things I've been through. You can tell me I've had a rough childhood, and I don't need to know all the specific things. I don't need to know why a fly swatter is scary for you. I already can guess about that, but I don't need to know, because I just know that, okay, so there's something that comes up when you think about a fly swatter, and what are you going to do with those feelings and that's how somatic therapy, it can be about what your body does when you think about that, and not even about what the real story was about the fly swatter. So, but the other part of it that's different is that when you're a child and you're going through a traumatic childhood, you often feel alone. Usually what's so traumatic about it and why it can't be resolved is that it's you didn't have anybody who helped you get through it, or not enough, and that's what's different in trauma therapy, is that you have a person that you develop a safe, trusting, therapeutic relationship with, based on feeling comfortable with them, that they're the right fit for you. And then they're there to walk through these feelings with you. You're not alone with it. And it's like a reparative emotional experience to have, basically it's sort of like almost the idea of having a safe, loving, caring parent help you through the pain. It's kind of like, redoing it in a way that's safe, and you can process the feelings and really cope.
Yeah, no, and I love what you do. I love that you love what you do. And I know that there are, it is something that I say all the time, you are not alone, right? And I have to remind myself of that when I look at people and everybody seems, a certain way. And I have to remind you, people are out there who need help, and you're not alone when you are one of those people, right? So
we all need help at times, everyone.
Oh yeah, exactly. So how do we, I told you I can't say the word, so I'm going to have to tell
healing.com. That's our website. So for people who are seeking trauma therapy with us in Severna Park, we're doing online therapy now, and we'll return to our office in Severna Park. We have 4 therapists in the practice besides me, and we all have kind of different specialties. One does maternal mental health, perinatal, and birth trauma, like we were talking about, and one specializes mostly in grief, especially grief from suicide loss, which, as we mentioned, is a big problem here. And 2 of them, one works mainly with children, using play therapy, and one works with children and adults. And so she uses play therapy and does sensory work with children, and with adults she works more on helping people who have childhood trauma. And then I work with people who have childhood trauma as well. But of course, there are many other therapists in our area too. So many wonderful people. And there are a lot of free resources too. There's the Pro Bono Counseling Project of Maryland. That's a way to get free therapy.
Write that down because I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, the Pro Bono Counseling Project. And basically what they do is you contact them and say, I'm looking for trauma therapy. I had a childhood that was difficult and I don't have any insurance. And they will connect you with a therapist who's agreed to volunteer their time. So
Right.
It's not an agency you go to get free therapy. It's a service that connects you with therapists in the community who offer free services to, a certain number of people.
Okay. Well, that's good to know because we get a lot of calls with Ferguson fans, and and as a mom who has dealt with a kid who was suicidal, I know how important it is to get them help. And so often I hear them say, "I can't afford it yet," and
Yeah.
and having a resource for them, that's really good to know. So I've written it down. I will make sure it's out there so people know about it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, and I thank you for coming on. I'm going to tell us what we're doing tomorrow. So
Thank
tomorrow
you.
thank you so much. Tomorrow we have Jennifer Yeatts. She's coming on. She's a realtor. She's the one who helped me sell my house. But she's going to talk about how in the world you sell a house in the time of coronavirus, right? What do you do? How are you going to do that? And then how do you go and look at houses? And how do you go to the settlement? There's so much. We just finished settling, and it was a little crazy, settle with all the masks on, and it's just a little crazy. So I wanted to thank you again. This is how you get in touch with you. You can reach out to me too. If you don't know how to get in touch with her, I can get you in touch with Laura. Laura, thank you so much. This was really, really great. And I think
Thank you.
I think it's so important. So thank you. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow.